Bonnie, Bruce, can you hear me?
Hi, Greg.
Yes.
Hey, good evening. Hey, thank you. Looking
Hi.
for a little confirmation. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Was struggling to get it unmuted for a moment there. Thanks for verifying.
Yep.
So let's see, we've got Paul's on, Mark, Deb, Patty, Clay, Lynn, Matt, Ed, Chris. Okay. How are we doing, Paul, as far as people are lined up to start?
Everybody that wanted to be in is in.
Okay, well, we'll wait just a minute since we're at the exact bottom of the hour. Maybe a minute ahead, depending which clock I look at. So
Dan's also here. We're together.
excellent. Okay, super. Thank you. Well, for all of us that know what winter's really like, we're starting to feel the temperatures, right? Paul, I guess I'll check one more time since we appear to be at the 6:30 half-hour mark. Anybody else lined up?
Nobody's waiting.
Okay, well then we'll go ahead and start. Appreciate everybody getting on this evening. We took a little bit of a break with the intent to get some work done. There has been some things forward in advance of the call. Hopefully you had a chance to at least open them up so you can see what's there, maybe even have a chance to go through them and do some review. Also says the agenda basically at the strike of midnight, which reflected what we're looking to cover today as well as a preview of what we're looking to cover on Thursday. It needs to be a pretty substantive week of going over what we have drafted so people have a chance to weigh in on where this is headed as far as assembling information for the report, which is our end goal. And in all cases, I think things are being drafted, so plenty of room for input. Ultimately, this will be in the report format for our final review, but it's a mid-stage point in time to go through that. So let's go ahead and jump in. Appreciate Bonnie getting the minutes out. And as before, I ask if there's any content-related input that people could share. So I'll put that out to the group here, whether there's anything relative to the minutes that needs to be reflected any different in light of people's recollection of the call back on the 4th of January. Okay, hearing not, go ahead and motion that we approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Patty. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? Okay, so the minutes are approved. I will follow up with you, Bonnie. I'm going to go ahead and get those signed off. I'll probably bring them down to the township myself. So we have those filed since we have a little scanning issue here in light of working remote. Excellent. So with that, we'll move on to tonight's main subject matter under number 2. We have material that's been provided in those 3 categories that are reflected. So we'll go through those top to bottom, and we'll start with the introduction. So I was going to kind of withhold this because I thought we might refine it in light of what information we gather, which we obviously will. But I thought we need to start rolling on getting some content out to the group so that we can start filling in the rest of it as we get, and if we get additional input. So if you just pull up the introduction, it's basically a one-pager. There happens to also be a second page that is the start of a table of contents, which is really reflective of kind of where we left off on our last call. So what I want to do is just make sure there's nothing drastically different as viewed by the team. But then, as I indicate on the agenda, and this goes for this as well as other aspects, totally open to specific input. So, it's not just in this case, but as we start refining, preferably when we get into report format, we'll be looking for people that might have additional changes. There could even be grammaticals or ways in which things are presented that are viewed a little differently, and we want to be open to people providing input. But we are going to need to have that fairly specific and basically provide in writing so we capture it accurately. So this is maybe the first chance of that. But I guess I'll open it up. Is there any questions or major content missing that we should discuss to make sure we are on the same page of how this is in essence laid out? I'll open up to the group. Okay. Hearing none, I'll assume we're good for now. Again, this is going to be open for editing as we work through. If you have something that you yourself feel should be added or changed, what I'd ask, and this goes for the feedback in general on written material, please send an email with your input back to myself, Melissa, and Bonnie. That way all three of us will keep each other honest as far as seeing stuff come in and putting attention to trying to build that back into what will be our draft and ultimately our master for completion down the road. So we have the makings for an introduction, we have the makings for a table of contents, and we'll use that as our placeholder for now. So we got something there to build on. We'll keep adding to it. With that, let's move to the second end. This one was some work done on the part of I think it was Jeff and Lynn and Mark. I think Mark's going to lead, but he had created a structure as well as an introductory set of text associated with the financial side of taking a look at what this might entail as far as additional responsibilities on the part of the township, if that in fact is how we pull it together, but having a view of it from a numbers perspective. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you. We should check Mark to see if he's on mute. Mark, you're on mute from what I see on the Zoom call.
Okay, how's that? Can you hear me now?
There you go.
All right.
I can hear you now.
I was just commenting that my daily schedule is a little bit different than yours. I get my responses done by 9 p.m. I don't think you start till 9 until 2 in the morning. So I don't always get them till the next day. So we have a different calendar. It may be age associated type of schedule. I'm not sure. In any event, what we did with our section, if you recall back to the application, there was a third page. There were three specific segments that were referenced there, one of which was the administration and costs. Within that mission of that segment, there was about 8 different bullet points that literally we use those to develop a questionnaire for townships looking to evaluate and analyze and compare. What we did was we looked at 4 existing townships that have planning and zoning, and then one that previously had planning and zoning, but that the history would provide some additional information. And so the questionnaire that was developed was sent out to all of the townships. There was a brief follow-up on a few of them for clarification. But Jeff, maybe you want to talk about what we did from when we solicited the response to the document that we presently have. Are you there, Jeff?
Yes, I am. I'm here. Yep. Yeah. So what we tried to do is, if you go on to the last thing that Greg sent out this afternoon, if you go to page 4 and 5. That will show you on the left-hand column, that will show you the questions that we had. There were 16 questions that we had. And then going across it, you'll see that we have Midway, Duluth, Gneeson, Lakewood, and then, as Mark said, we got a little information from Kenosha. So we try to, get the same kind of answers, or same response, whatever it may be from them on how many pits, the cost that it takes for them, financial assurances, et cetera, et cetera. You'll see on all of them that they go down. And we also tried to get what their cost was, how they run it by zoning administrators, zoning inspectors, whatever it is. So we tried to show that on that one graph that I'm showing there in a comparison going across. So the one that I believe it was Lakeville, they kind of just consolidated all theirs into a couple paragraphs. So we took it away and still were able to get the answers. But I think the biggest comparative ones that we have there is the Gunnison that does have, you'll see down there on question number 9 that they have 8 gravel pits. And whereas the other ones, Midway just has a recycling one, and then one in Duluth, and they said 1 to 2 in the Lakewood one. So you can kind of follow it along on how we broke it out, just to make sure that there's a comparative, for when we go forward on our steps on if we do move forward on this on seeing what the cost might be, et cetera. So Mark, are you going to talk a little bit about the first couple pages?
Yeah, unless you want to, I can kind of cover that if you'd like. Doesn't matter.
Well, why don't you go ahead and I'll add what you have on it. So,
Okay.
Yeah. I should say, does anybody have questions on the part that I was just referring to, the page 4 and 5 on that?
Jeff, this is Greg. The only question, I know you guys have been getting feedback in light of the survey. Are you anticipating additional feedback from these townships, or is it just a matter of putting more specifics into the prior estimates around costing or dollars that you have to put together?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that we're going to get any more specific costing from the townships. And Mark, I know, has been talking to some of these people. But when we look at the costing, as you look at some of these other schedules, we tried to give ranges on what it is, not specific, other than the fact in the beginning, what we know it's already cost Friedenberg, what we're incurring, what we think we will incur to put the ordinance together. And then we tried to be a little bit more specific on and do a comparative of Gunnison on how they run it and what their costs have been. And as you can see, and Mark will talk a little bit more about this on what we put in there for, a lot of, things that we just don't know that are to be determined, just simply because, we're not there. We don't know how this is all going to go together.
So we have the opportunity to reach back out to them if there's a reason to. We've touched base with them for, follow up on a couple of questions and our clarifications. And we I think we have a good rapport with them now. So if there's something specific that we want to further pursue, we can do that. I think this was basically to give us kind of a feel for a number of things. One being, what's involved in the overall financials, but also operationally, how they're structured and what types of, and again, that was part of in our application, some of the areas talk about the different positions or contract services that are required as part of the structure in order to take on any kind of planning and zoning package. And so, and that's part of the next, area of information that we have in our packet. In my cover letter, or our cover letter, I reference 4 attachments, and one of the first ones is the basically what we call it non-recurring, the upfront costs. That it's those costs that we've incurred to date, as well as our anticipated future costs to the point of implementing an ordinance. And that's information that actually has been generated from the different resources that we have through the township, through the attorneys, through SEH. And so that's all, we've got support documentation for that information, and where there are unknowns, we just put to be determined. We don't know necessarily how much more time supervisors, clerks, attorneys, whatever, are going to put in prior to an ordinance, if we get that far, is implemented. And so we've got the non-recurring costs, and we also call it pre-ordinance, which are the first, future expenses. So that is the non-recurring cost sheet, which provides kind of a range of estimate of what it might cost to take us to that point where we've determined to proceed with the ordinance or not, and have actually gone through the process with using the professionals to guide us and assist us in getting it accomplished. So that's one of the, the first sheets. We also then talk about the recurring costs in the next sheet, which it was more of a comparison of what we might expect for Friedenberg. There's a lot of, fill in the blanks there. We have used Gnesen as an example because it's most comparable of the townships with the number of pits that they have. And we laid out the various positions that you'll find with the other townships. And the positions, the structure, I think is important because, that is what potentially the township would be looking at if they implement planning and zoning. And so it lays out what, could be expected. And and I'm kind of jumping into the third page of the financials, but in any event, we do a comparison with Friedenberg and Gnesen to a certain extent, and a lot of fill in the blanks. So if you look at the sheet that says recurring costs and revenue possibilities, you need to refer back and forth to the next sheet, which is the range of costs from the various townships. And what we did was, when we looked at the townships that have planning and zoning and the positions, we said, okay, what kind of a range? And I'll just give a couple of examples. For instance, under revenue, I'm going to jump up back and forth, but under revenue possibilities, it ranged for a CUP fee anywhere from $385 up to $1,000. And so we don't know what number, as an example, Friedenberg might choose to utilize if they get to that point. There are a number of different ranges if you look at the positions, and the positions can be, or the can be voluntary, it can be the existing staff, it can be contract services. Some of the areas such as engineering and legal services typically are contract. So what we would look to do was identify those that were actually documented or quantifiable in the minimum to maximum price ranges, so that as a person evaluates, what kind of cost impact it would have, then you get a feel for what you might be encountering. Also, again, the positions themselves, you can see a little bit of what is contract services and what is, employee. And again, the baseline, everything comes from that spreadsheet with the 4 townships. Some of the information is obtained from other sources that is inputted here, but again, it's all, source material that we drew from. Something else that we added was the actual Gnesen conditional use permit checklist. And the purpose of having that conditional use permit checklist is it really gives an indication or reflects the process that would be necessary. It's what they use as a checklist to go through the process if you were to have an application, for a gravel pit or a conditional use permit. And it really shows the number of hearings and the follow-up that's necessary from beginning to end. And so again, the purpose of that is, it gives the town board, the citizens, an idea as to what would be involved in taking on that task, that responsibility. And that came from Gnesen. So we have, and we call it in our document zoning authority. It can be whatever you want to call it, but it's planning and zoning. And again, back to the 5 township comparative spreadsheets, that has some of the detailed information of the positions and the costs associated with those positions, whether they're contract or employee. Because some of them contract out to part-time people to do some of the services, and you can contract the services like pit inspections to a professional firm such as SEH Matt Wolf. You can train people to do those inspections, or when you get to enforcement, though, that's something that we're going to be talking more about at some point in the near future. How do you approach enforcement? You have residents who are part of the pool of staff or employees that are doing enforcement, or are you using a more professional person, or are you using an attorney? So there's a number of decisions, and that all impacts the numbers that we would experience for the different types of work and requirements, for the planning and zoning process. I'm trying to think what else. I did provide, a cover letter that gives an overview of this whole package of information. So I'm not going to go through all of that. I mean, it's a fair amount of information to digest all in one sitting. We did have, just so you know, the initial information that went out when we're trying to compact a spreadsheet onto one sheet of paper that's readable. It's a little challenging. I have to wear glasses to begin with, and when we put, we somehow compressed it, and we eliminated one of the columns, which was midway. We had to add that back in. So all of a sudden, to get it on the page, the print became smaller, which is challenging for me, and I'm sure some of the others. So this is work in progress, and we'll look to update some of the information as it comes in over the next couple of weeks. And so we'll hopefully have a little bit more readable size font and some updated information before we finalize as part of the overall report and recommendations. So I think that's my kind of overview of the package. So Jeff or Lynn, do you have other comments you'd like to make or anything else you'd like to share?
As far as I'm good, yeah, I mean, you pretty much covered it, Mark. It's the forms are pretty self-explanatory of Gunnison, and then, the ranges are, is all four of the townships where we talk about the different. But yeah, that's I think you pretty much covered it. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank Jeff and Lynn. Obviously, as you can see from the information, there was a lot of time in developing the spreadsheets, and a lot of information gathered and a lot of information inputted. And so there's been a lot of people hours. I can't say man hours anymore because it's not all about men. People hours put into this information. And so again, I'm sure there are other things that we could have or should have or might have done, but for the timeline that we had, and dependent upon the townships and the responses, the last one coming in the end of last week, I thought that as a subgroup, I think we did pretty good to generate this package of information. And again, I want to thank both Jeff and Lynn for their participation in this.
I just want to give a big shout out to both Jeff and Mark for all your hard work on all of this, putting it together. I pretty much just formatted it. So thanks. That's very informative. There's a lot of information here. Have fun. Welcome to our world. Thanks.
Yeah. You're welcome.
I like numbers, so it's good to have a mix. All text gets a little boring. I'll pass on a few things, and as you folks shared and I shared, and it's kind of a common theme, everything's really in draft mode and being refined as we move forward, but it's great to see some structure and see it formulated, coming together of sorts. I like the non-recurring and reoccurring because clearly there is a big difference. So the fact that you call those out separately, I think, helps clarify what costs are being looked at. I like the concept of ranges because there is probably some variability both in terms of the data gathered, as you referenced, from the different townships, as well as any estimates that might have to be made later. And maybe that's going to be one of the things as you fill this in. If there's estimates, maybe they need to be noted differently than dollars drawn from sources that are considered to have more of a direct reference versus best simulation or extrapolation of it. So a couple things on that, but I do like the way that comes together. One thing that I will throw out there, nothing's to be cited, just to be considered, but there is the issue of sunk cost, and the first page does deal with some costs covered off by the township in advance of this initiative, and they may or may not have any relevance for those that deal with financial planning and investments. Sunk cost is a concept where what we do going forward isn't necessarily dependent on what was spent prior. So I don't know how much that information may add, or quite frankly, maybe it is already known and it's good reinforcement to include it. So just throw it out there as a thought, whether that's relevant to how we would pull a recommendation together. But I appreciate seeing it because it lets me understand where things are at up to this point. So interesting. On the non-reoccurring future expense pre-ordinance.
Greg,
Okay.
before
Yep.
you leave that, in reference to the previously incurred costs, actually, that was a specific request by one of the township supervisors at a town board meeting, and he said he wanted to see the whole of the package, its impact on Friedenberg, including already incurred costs and anticipated ones, and enforcement. So that really is partially due to, you know, we probably wanted to see it, but also it was specifically requested by Jim Ray.
Okay, so Jim requested that. Okay, I'll put a note in my margin. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mark. Okay, well, like I said, they see it a couple different times. It should be the same information. So, okay, noted. Thank you. Under the future expenses pre-ordinance, I'm thinking we have 2 township supervisors on the committee. Possibly they would be able to help as we pull this together over the coming week or so with anything that they understand might fit the categories that you have TBD, since it's they're probably closest to what's anticipated. If there was additional attorney fees, which seems to be the biggest category. So I don't know if Clay and or Pam might be able to weigh in on that, but it sounds like those are fees associated with our own township versus the survey, and they might be in the best position to put an estimate forth so that we can kind of get an insider's perspective. Just a thought to throw out there. And then when you start doing the comparison, this is on page 2, where you compare primarily to Gnesen, which is an ongoing theme that I think we've all noticed. They have the more comprehensive, more comparable, particularly as you gather data on the number of pits and other aspects, which is great. Do you know, Mark, is that fee associated with what we're trying to do with the cups associated with borrow pits, or are those dollars associated with a broader scope of zoning and administration?
I guess what I would suggest doing is take a look at their actual response, because it is verbatim. So if you look at the question that I referenced, and if you go to and again, that information came specifically from them in response to the specific question. So you can actually go to the spreadsheet, take a look at the questions, and then if anybody feels that we need some further clarification, and that's what I'm looking for, without getting into a lot of it tonight, but if you want to provide questions after reviewing their response, you have I think Melissa put their actual response on the system, so you can pull their actual response to the questions, and then look at how it, the question relative to what you just indicated. And if you have some more questions that you'd like me to follow up with them on, I can do that.
Okay.
Mark,
Okay, so
you go first.
Go ahead.
I actually had talked to Nate, the guy who's the zoning officer for Gnesen. This was this is before this happened, but I asked him about cost, and he goes, I think my whole paycheck was $5,000 for the year, and that's all of zoning, he said, and I barely do anything with gravel pits. So he said a very small part of it, like his whole 5,000, and he actually was just guessing when he said 5,000, so it's 5,320. He said a very small part was actually gravel pits. So I do think this is I don't want to say dangerous number, but it's a skewed number, because just from my conversation with him, this was Gnesen does all zoning and a ton of it, lots of shoreland, lots of buildings, and this is what we're asking him for money, like for a quote on, is a very small percentage of what he does. So I do think we need to relook at that. Even the legal fee being $1,600 or $1,650, Was that actual lawsuit from gravel pits, or was that just their total legal fees for all zoning? Because that's a big difference too. So I think we need a little more clarification on what they're telling us their zoning expenses are, because that's a very broad category, if that makes sense.
No, no, it totally does. I understand that. And again, he is only one component of a much larger structure. And so I'm not sure. This came from the clerks as well. And so that was generated and accumulated from them. So I guess I'd ask in the same sense that if you've got, maybe you and Greg want to talk, if you want to frame it in some fashion that I can bring it back to them, to the clerk who's packaging this, I'd be fine with that. It'd be helpful to me if you could discuss what it is you want clarification on and provide it to me, so in turn that I can make that request more formally, to I think it was Ellen. I can't remember which one between the different townships, the different clerks. But yeah, they package that. Take a look at the information that's there and available, and then provide me the question that you'd like a response to, and then I'll follow up on those.
Okay, so one thing, like, I mean, I have a KISS philosophy in life, keep it simple. So, we have a quote from that company, SEH, from Matt Wolf. So we already have a quote from what he said our costs will be per year. So since we have a quote from a company that said how much they're going to charge us, so we kind of know where our costs are going to be. Do you guys think there's really a benefit to going and looking at other townships that are not our township and they're not our zoning officer that we're hiring, because we kind of have an idea? I mean, am I seeing this as off? Or, I mean, it just seems like we might be going into too many avenues when we already have a guy who says, I will be your zoning officer and town engineer for this amount of dollars. It just seems like we might be going down too many rabbit holes when we already have the answer.
Well,
Am I seeing that wrong?
He would not be the zoning officer. He would do the inspections on the pits as a service. He would not do the enforcement, and his services would be limited. And so what this is what he would charge for doing the initial inspection and doing a report accordingly. Follow-up enforcement, and that's an additional scope of services. So this is just a preliminary.
From what I read, he was going to be everything.
No, I talked to him specifically about this, and he submitted it, and he actually defines it. If you look at the submittal that he provided, he defined specifically what he would do, and he said, if you want more than just the inspections, there's going to be additional services accordingly. So basically, he has an inspection checklist that he uses. He would go out, do all the inspections, identify what shortcomings there are or what non-compliance issues there are, but it doesn't mean he's going to do enforcement and compliance beyond the initial inspections. And then as I referenced down at the bottom of the page, you start out with basically we took a average per pit cost and applied it to, I think your number was 14. I'd expect that we can reduce that in half, including his cost in half for inspections, because a lot of those pits are inactive. But the only question is, I think, first, have they been, what's the term again for, what is it?
Reclaimed.
Reclaimed, yeah. Are they inactive? Are they unclaimed? Are they used sometimes or not? So I think you can eliminate half that expense in short order after the first year. But again, his scope of services are limited. It comes down to an hourly basis. So effectively what he did was he said, this is going to take me 2 days, and this is my hourly rate, and this is what it's going to cost you. If I do 11 pits, it'll take about 2 days, and I'll do my inspection checklist and provide it to you, and that's my fees. You want me to go beyond that, then you're going to pay more, more time, more money. So.
Okay, so maybe it'd be beneficial for us to have maybe a smaller, Zoom meeting with a few of us with Nate, and actually ask him, from start to end, how does this work? Because he is the inspector and the zoning officer. So it'd be interesting to see what Nate has to say, since he does everything. What other duties and what we need to do, and what he thinks that cost would be specifically. I think he'd be a real key person for us to get to talk to on this. If that does you guys make sense to you guys?
Yeah, I think a combination of that might be good, where Mark's asking to have the line of questioning captured, since he's already gone through 1 or 2 iterations with these folks. So I want to be respectful of that. So I think that's a valid ask. What questions do we have that might probe a bit further in light of how we're looking at the information? So I think, you know, if people other than Melissa and myself want to take that on, that's great. They could speak up. We should also reread the quote that we have, like you're clarifying, Mark, just to ensure we know what we read into that is in it or not in it. And then with that stuff kind of detailed, the line of questioning, then maybe having, since there might be real value of hearing it firsthand or discussing it, go back through the individual that's most closely working with this, Gneeson, who appears to be the best contact, and kind of go through. So I'm open to a combination of capturing the questioning to share, to see how that compares to what you might have found out, Mark, and then maybe having an opportunity to walk through that. Maybe you facilitate, but walk through that in conjunction with Melissa, so we understand as thoroughly as possible.
Yeah, there was.
And I was just looking through that the quote, and it does include, like, so Mark, that Matt Bulf would actually do the training for the planning commission, so we would actually be able to whoever is on the planning commission would be trained and able to do the enforcement and such for that. So I think the cost could be dramatically dropped from that initial cost from SEH, includes training. So I think that's something beneficial to us that would actually cut costs in the long term. That should be noted. So
Yeah, the training is a separate expense from the inspections. That there are 2 different areas that he quoted. One was for the inspections, and then one was for the training. So I don't have that in front of me. I could pull it up, but that you take a look at that and you'll see 2 different numbers. I think my recollection.
Well, no, I think the first year I don't have I don't have that one in front of me, but I believe what on page 1, like the 41 to 46,000 or 100, that was for the initial inspections and training of all staff. I'm 90% sure that. I could be wrong. We'll have to go back and put that in the notes if I'm, but I believe it was for everything. It was a all-encompassing first initial inspection and training.
Draft policy statement, procedures, inspection form, and inventory list. That's what the $4,100 to $4,600.
Okay.
And then the inspection aspect of it was that the $29.25 to $35.70 was based on an estimate for the inspection fee per pit.
Okay.
So those are 2 separate areas.
Okay, I'll go back and look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Mark on that we took it as 2 separate ones, and the amount that we did on the recurring cost of $2,935, their cost was for 11 pits, but we have 14. So we just did it on a per pit cost based upon what their number was.
Okay.
But again, we did indicate, or made an asterisk on that, saying that again, we viewed it as being the initial year, and that cost would significantly reduce after the first year. So yeah, these numbers are going to be adjusted depending on where we go with this. So again, it's I'm fine with following up with some of this information to get better clarification, because somehow we have to be able to provide the town board with the information that they're comfortable with, but they're ultimately going to have to decide whether they want to contract it out. Training somebody on the planning commission, first of all, you go anywhere from a township that gets 9 volunteers on the planning commission to paid for per meeting planning commissions. Now, I'm not sure about the rest of you. How many of you would like to volunteer to be on the planning commission free of service, and then go out and inspect your neighbors' properties and get involved with compliance issues and things? It's not an easy task. It's part of the reason why initially, going back in time, it created some, controversy and contentiousness and conflicts between people. It's, I don't know. It's it's a challenging position to be in. But in any event, we'll just let me know, we can have a discussion independent of this, or you can put some questions together and we can follow up on them and see if we can get some better clarification. All right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good, Mark. Appreciate it. Yeah, I just had one other. I like the cross-referencing to some of the other things in note form. I think we're going to find when we pull different sections together that sometimes they're stressing a similar concept, which is good. If we have it noted in more than one place, we might, as a ladder pass through all the documentation, find a common way to reference. And you've got like reference to DNR and soil and waters and EPA and so on, which is really good to see that. And then that comes up elsewhere, and I think those notes are important. We'll just see how they blend together when we get to more final product.
Well, I'm sure that once a person takes some time to sit down, it's all, it took a long period of time to generate the information, and it's difficult to sit down in a day and try to absorb and understand the package. So I'm sure there'll be a few more questions that come up between now and the next meeting. So we're ready to kind of be responsive and do what we can to get them clarified.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, well, there's definitely an action item at a minimum for Melissa and myself to look back at that quote. That is kind of the basis of how you applied some of that, as well as the information that you've taken from the questionnaire, and then a line of conditioning for primarily, it sounds like the gentleman more likely than not that oversees some of this within Gneeson, have that captured, and then attempt to have a discussion with him to gain collective understanding, a little better collective understanding of it. So definitely some next steps there.
There were other, statements or comments made in the discussions with the townships, which, unless we had something documented, I mean, basically comments about, well, it costs us X amount of dollars, on our budget, but we don't cover the cost. There's things that were said that we just did not incorporate in here because they weren't provided in writing, and we couldn't, verify it at the moment. So we tried to, have the source information and the documentation as they stated it. And so, again, some of it needs, probably some further clarification to verify it is what we think it is. So we're good with that.
Okay. Well, being closest to it, or your group being closest to it, is there anything that stood out since, we're doing kind of just a status in light of what you've got so far? Is there anything stood out that was like more concerning or surprising, or did it all seem to kind of flow in light of what you'd anticipate based on the information that they provided?
Well, for me, I think what surprised me the most was that one township, which is probably the most active township, and maybe it's because of that they had a voluntary planning commission. It seems like the other townships for the various positions, whether it be part-time positions, employees, or contract services, it was all, for pay or fees. And so I found it interesting that, the planning commission, there's no stipend or no pay, for those services. And it's a very active community. So obviously, if Friedenberg goes down this path and they can find 9 volunteers, that'll save money. But otherwise, I've worked with planning commissions in multiple jurisdictions, and worked with planning and zoning, and so for me, nothing here was surprising. Jeff or Lynn, from you guys?
Well, being I haven't worked with them, just the different ways that the different townships just handle it as far as the manpower, as we're saying on the one sheet, between the town board all the way down to inspection, enforcement, and so on. Some of them do it some way and others, and fees involved with it. I was a little bit more interested in seeing that as it went along. So, yeah.
Appreciate you sharing that. Anybody else have questions on this subject matter? Or anybody else want to kind of weigh in terms of looking at how to better understand this information beyond those that we just were brought up? Melissa, myself, me with Mark, and the others on his team. Okay. Not hearing, then I assume we have the subgroup defined. Okay.
Greg?
Yes, hey, buddy.
I was having trouble unmuting myself. We think it's a great idea to get together with Nate and get some more specifics on this.
Okay. Is that also you want to be on the call, or you just think it's a good idea?
No, we just think it's a good idea. We don't need to be on the call.
Okay. Okay, Bonnie. All right. Well, we've got a little work to do there, but appreciate when it's been done and look forward to understanding it better. It is a lot of information, Mark and Lynn and Jeff, that you shared, so appreciate everything so far. If there's anything else on that, speak up. Otherwise, we'll move to the next subject. Okay, not hearing anything else. Next one on there's a attachment that was provided that profiled the different townships on how they signify zoning and how that relates to cup extractive use permits being allowed. Melissa, did you want to kind of explain what we have here and get any input from the group?
All right. So I did ask Paul to get this on the screen so you guys can all see it. But basically, I compared the townships we were looking at to San Luis County and what they have for for where an extractive use permit is allowed or where it's not. So I simplified it just to a yes or no on the Excel document. And let's see. So Paul should hopefully get that up soon. But basically, so Midway Township, the only two areas they allow, here we go. Okay, so, all right. So if you look, let's see if I can scroll. I can't scroll. Okay, so we'll start with Midway. But you can see like the agricultural district and the rural residential are the only two places that they allow extractive use permits. And then you look at Duluth Township, we'll scroll up a little bit. And they only allow it in their, their forestry, agriculture, multi-use, non-shoreland, and limited industrial areas. Everything else, sorry, actually I should have done those too. So yellow means shoreland, or what I would consider what we consider shoreland. So basically, there's very few areas, even Duluth, that allow cups. It would be the forested area, agricultural, and the multi-use zones. And then you go to Gunnison. They have a little more, their rural residential, suburban residential, highway, and resource management allow cups, but all their waterfront and their shoreland do not allow cups for extractive use. If you scroll to Lakewood, they also, they have the forestry and agricultural allow it, everything else does not. And then you go to the county, and they allow it almost everywhere except for Lake Superior, and just two places, and residential, and then like a landfill. Like they basically, I mean, even sensitive areas, I thought that was kind of strange, but shoreland, sensitive areas, they're all good to go for the county to approve a gravel pit. So if you want to go to scroll to the top, I think that, looking at these townships, they all in essence protect their shoreland. And I think in years to come, our township can look at, talking to the county about rezoning, but that's not where we're at. That's not what our purpose is here for. So the simplest version would be the definition of a shoreland for the DNR, from the DNR and from the county, is 1,000 feet from the ordinary high water level of a lake or pond, or 300 feet from a river. So basically, if we summarize what the other townships have done by basically recommending to the township that we increase setback to the shoreland standard of 1,000 feet from a lake or 300 feet from a river, that would basically do the same thing as what these townships have done in their zoning districts, without us having to go and rezone. It's just going to save a lot of costs, and we will create the same effect. So if that makes sense, that's kind of where I'm going with this. It would be a recommendation to them, but it would save a lot of money in the short term, because right now it's not a battle we want to fight of rezoning everything. That's not what we were here to do. We were just to do gravel pits. So that would be the simplest way to protect ourselves compared to other townships, looking at what they've done to what we want to do it and copy them. So those are the thoughts. I don't know what you guys think, but that's just kind of what I reviewed. So.
I like that, Melissa. I think I agree with you.
Me too.
Yeah, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Say, Melissa,
Yes.
I don't think we can,
this is Bruce. Is the 500-foot setback mini home, is that increasing us? Is that an increase in setback or?
So I also thought an increase of 500-foot setback from any home would be beneficial. You know, there are two safety officers that I'm very familiar, like friends with, and you know, and they both come to me and talk about silica dust. And Duluth is not an area of like high concentration of silica dust. Like we don't, was it sandstone, some type of mineral that has a lot of it. But they both said that silica dust is it's a carcinogen. It can go into your lungs, and all mines, everything, anyone who digs has to worry about this for their workers and the neighbors. So, you know, the more we're learning about silica dust, I think it might be wise for the township to increase a setback to any residential home to 500 feet, because the more we're learning about silica dust and its effects, if someone ends up, you know, having a gravel pit next to them, 300 feet away, whatever, 200 feet, 280 feet, I think in the case we have right now, and ends up with a respiratory disease, the township could be liable for that. That could be a lawsuit because of damages, because of the township allowing that person's health to be compromised for that. So setting a setback to 500 feet would, that's 200 extra feet from what it normally should be. And that would help protect, you know, like air, you know, air's like water. It helps dispense any chemicals and everything else. So there would be less chance of a strong amount of silica dust getting into their home. You know, I am neighbors with Jock Finner and Gina Okino or Gina Labelli, and they both tell me how, you know, when the wind is at the wrong direction, that the Derby pit comes in, and you know, the Finner has to close his window, and his poor mom's stuck in the house, and Gina, her garden is covered in dirt or in dust. So this is an issue for us that we need to protect our residents, and it just might be beneficial as a recommendation to the township board on why we think an increased setback is important, because we're learning more about the environmental impact of gravel pits. So it's a protection for a future lawsuit, because if you look at any ordinance or any comprehensive plan, the number one thing is to protect the residents' health and safety and general welfare. And if we can't protect the health, then what are we doing? So that's my point when I say.
Actually, our question was, is that enough? 500 feet.
You know,
Yeah.
I think any more would be too disputed in the township, and I think it would not. We would be fighting a battle that would not be winnable if any more than that. I think 500 feet. Given, I think 1,000 feet would be great for everything. But we're trying to make a compromised deal here. We're trying to see both sides of the party. And if we want to, if we want it on an educated basis, look at both sides fairly. I don't think 300 feet is fair, and I don't think 1,000 feet is fair. I would like 1,000 feet, but I don't think it's fair. So 500 feet would be a good compromise to both sides. And that's why I say that, because I think if we ask for 1,000 feet, then we might lose everything, versus a compromise, which I think needs to be done more. So that's why I thought 500 feet would be a better recommendation to everybody. So
We do have an expert on this area that has a cabin within the township. He's the safety inspector, safety manager for KETAC and HIBTAC. And did you talk to him about what, he said that the federal standards were increasing on that this year. Did you happen to talk to him about that, Melissa?
Yeah. His name is Matt Salo. He's a HIBTAC safety inspector. So he's one of the people I've spoken to. So, you know, this is HIBTAC. It's he's very, very familiar with silica sand, and it's not the South, which if you look at the maps, silica sand is normally in southern Minnesota. Hiptech is not in southern Minnesota, it's northern Minnesota. And he said they definitely still have concerns about silica dust and silica sand. And, you know, basically he agreed that the setback, you know, of 500 feet would be beneficial. There is no scientific evidence either way to say, you know, what footage is safest. There is no safest because there's none of evidence to prove either side. But they are having more evidence of that this is a carcinogen that can get into your lungs. So, you know, I think, you know, if we can set the setback to 500 feet and then increase the dust regulations, which actually, if you look at the Gneeson plan, there is more dust regulations to how that affects the neighbors. I think that would be a good compromise for the time being to fairly look at both sides, is how I see things.
Say, Mike, is Mike Anderson, please? Can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah, I hear you, Bruce. You hear me?
Yeah, I just had a question since we're talking setbacks. Since you've got a kind of a visual over there now and can actually see, you know, we talk numbers and feet. You have a visual there now. What do you think about setbacks? I know I'm springing this on you, but since you have a visual of setbacks now.
Well, I think the big thing with the setback kind of helped that they did the clearing of the trees and stuff. Because you realize right now it's 100-foot setback, but with the tree clearing, that might be closer to 75 feet. Because they don't want the trees falling into their gravel pit, which makes sense, you know, as they're digging it. 100 feet looks pretty little. I mean, it really does. As far as things that can be done to actually mitigate that, it sounds like that's pretty minimal too. Unless, you know, more trees are allowed to grow up, you know, in the setback area. But you know, the 500 from resident would help, definitely help. So yeah, I think that'd be much better than it was. The thing with the dust and talking to even the gravel companies, they really don't have any idea which way it's going to go, you know, at any given day.
Right.
And they don't really know the impact, you know, how bad it's going to be. But that, you know, that's at least a start, you know, and it's definitely further back, it is definitely better. That's just for dust. As far as the visual, I feel like my property is higher, so I see everything that happens, you know, in that pit area. But it would definitely help mitigate that distance. You know, a lot of pits maybe in areas there would be, and maybe it wouldn't be that critical, you know, as critical to have that, but it definitely helps in a situation where a house is that close.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
Thank
you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Mike and others. And, you know, Melissa threw out something that is kind of on that recommendation side of things, which we obviously have to work towards. So I guess she's kind of going first with an idea. I'm not going to jump off this subject, but just to refer to what we're looking to review on Thursday deals with this ordinance comparison. And so while we've seen from the work that Mark, Lynn, and Jeff have done that they see Gneeson as most representative in terms of being similar to us and having shared information, as well as in the case of the ordinance comparison, having the most, I'd say, comprehensive document of, you know, to compare to St. Louis County. That's really another parallels can be drawn, again, for subject of a discussion for Thursday. So we seem to be coming back to Gneeson time and time again for good reason. And so I'm going to put an ask out there, kind of a homework assignment for everybody. I was going to hold off till later, but I think it's timely that you've all been given the opportunity to take a look at it. Some people have dug into it for their specific segment report out prior. But what I will ask everybody to do is look through the Gneeson ordinance and look to identify anything that you're not in agreement with. So instead of looking for things that you think might be helpful, which are being detailed as a project and going to again be shared, where it might provide better protection to the residents, which is again part of the main mission here, main objective. look for anything you see that does not look to be constructive. And I'd ask that everybody look at that, or those that want to, contribute, look at that and then communicate that back in email to, again, Melissa, myself, and Bonnie, so we can capture that and maybe share that back in advance of the Thursday meeting. So is that clear? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So great. So that's a homework assignment. Melissa, I don't want to jump off this, or other people have questions on this, but I think you heard what she said. Is going from looking at the comparison of these and thinking of a way that might be able to extract some information that could be used as part of the recommendation, because we do have 4 different townships to compare versus St. Louis County. And again, you heard what she shared as a consideration. So, any more discussion on that subject?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Got me?
Is that Mark?
Yeah. I'm still trying to understand when you're talking about comparisons, and I'm seeing, I guess I'm looking for the setback comparisons. I'm hearing something about 500 feet, though I don't necessarily see something in comparison of the different townships when they have different terminology for the different classifications. Waterfront, I don't know what that band is, or the width of the band from waterfront necessarily. So I guess I was expecting or anticipating, or I thought maybe there'd be a comparison for what the setbacks are between them, whether it be shoreline setbacks or house setbacks or that type of a thing. So I'm not sure, where, again, I'm seeing a recommendation, which is in advance of having the data made available and reviewed and discussed. And so I need further, from my understanding, I mean, again, I have not been spending any time whatsoever on this area, because that wasn't part of the area that I'm involved with, but I'm thinking to myself, okay, what are the house setbacks for the other townships? What are the, I understand the shoreland DNR definition, but in reality, what are the actual setbacks based on the different descriptors that they have here with the yeses and nos? And then also, my other question has to do with overlays. There seems to be 5 different areas within the county and townships that talk about overlays, and some have a yes and some have a no as it relates to the CUPs on the overlays. And so I need to understand, is that the zoning overlays that were made available to townships, or is that a category that the St. Louis County has? And so I don't quite understand that either. And then I'm looking for the state statute part of what was supposed to be part of the comparison analysis. And I think you even referenced something, Greg, in your agenda here about the state, but I haven't seen anything yet, I don't believe, in reference to the state. And whether it's relevant or not, maybe it's not even relevant, I don't know. So those are actually, right. There was 3 different areas that I just touched upon, and that is, I need a little help understanding where these setbacks are all coming from in comparison between the different townships in the county, what they are, and comparatively speaking. So that's an area I think we need, at least for me, I need to understand that better. And then what the overlays, because again, some say yes and some say no on these overlays, which I don't know if anybody can help me out now, or maybe we can do that for the next meeting, is help to educate me on the why some overlays give a yes to a CUP and some overlays give a no to the CUP. So just a couple 3 things that would be helpful for me.
So just another observation too, that Gnesen is the closest township to us as far as comparison, but they do have 11 gravel pits in an area that is more than twice as big as Friedenberg Township is. And we have 14 gravel pits in an area that's less than half the size. And our our ordinance, if there is to be one, doesn't have to be exactly like anybody else's. It can be setbacks that we might decide are better for our township based on how small it is and how many pits we already have and how much shoreland we have. Nobody else has 40% of their township being water. We are very unique in that. And so our ordinance isn't necessarily going to look like anyone else's.
All right. And then, so for your question with the overlay, Mark, honestly, I cannot do that homework. I mean, I cannot read every single one of these definitions and go into the exact reason to them. I was trying to get a summary of all of them, and basically, like the summary of them. And from what I talked to Nate, like to summarize what their zoning districts mean was basically they don't allow gravel pits in the shoreline district is a summary of it. So again, I'm a KISS person and people don't always like that, but keep it simple. And so when I look at this, the most simple version for us to do this is to take it out of the shoreland, plain and simple. Like St. Louis County, that's a Lake Superior overlay. No, we are not Lake Superior, so that doesn't apply to us. And then I would need to compare the county versus the township's setbacks offhand. I believe the Gnesen setback is 300 feet. But like Bonnie said, we can do things on our own. We can, recommend more restrictive still. And I said again about the silica dust being why I think 500 feet would be better than 300 feet. I should have put more detail in about what the county has versus the townships. But even this last cup that came through, the extractive site is like 285 feet from the current, the nearest home. So the county does give a lot of more grace than we definitely want to see. So that's kind of where I came up with these, but I could give more information, but I'm not exactly, I don't exactly have a lot of time to make a great report. I mean, I think anyone could read the county and the township ordinances and find this information out for themselves, but I think our recommendation is still more based on current information, what we're learning from the environment, and that's why the recommendations were what I gave.
Okay, and I didn't, again, I didn't necessarily expect to have answers to it. I just noticed that a couple of the different townships do have overlays, as well as the county has several overlays. And so I don't know I think it's important to understand if we're putting information in front of us that we know what it is they pertain to. And same with the setbacks. If somebody else other than myself, as we go through the process, starts saying, well, where do these numbers come from? And how do we respond to that? What is the basis for saying it should be this versus something else? And I agree with Bonnie. Ultimately, the product can be whatever the township wants it to be, but we have to have the data to compare and discuss, and a basis for making a decision, whether it's 300, 400, 500, 600, or whatever. And you're going to get different opinions from different people just by virtue of what I'm hearing in this discussion. Well, maybe it should be more, maybe it shouldn't be. We're debating things, already, and we're coming up with, basically recommendations, but we don't have all the answers and all the data yet in. And so I'm not ready, for recommendations when I still have questions. So that's all I'm saying is, as you're asking for me to provide additional clarification and information, I'm expecting that perhaps there's going to be other areas that we're going to need the same type of thing occurring as well. And so, and again, you're right. A tremendous amount of time is being spent on this, and you're saying you don't haven't had the time to do that. And I express my concern with the expediency at which we're proceeding, because we need to do our due diligence and be prepared to answer the questions. And if we're going to say, well, we didn't have time, that makes it difficult, to be, an acceptable product. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. So
Yeah, let me jump in, Mark. Appreciate everybody sharing on that. You know, when we did initially try to divide this up to have people step into a role of doing some investigative work, you know, and I see Jason, you're on the call. You know, under the zoning description and such, you know, Jason had initially provided some additional input. I don't know if Jason feels he has, you know, the background, additional background to look into this, because you know, Melissa had shared this as a starting point for dialogue here. And you're right, Mark. You know, it spilled into over, you know, where might this lead as a recommendation. But you know, I don't think there's any harm in sprinkling a little bit of that in there, realizing we need to get to that point, right? So we need to start having that type of a conversation. But you know, Jason, do you want to speak to the level that you looked into this, or the type of question that Mark just said he would benefit by knowing more about, or is that outside the scope of what you're in a position to speak to? You're on mute right now, Jason.
I'm not gonna lie, I was like half paying attention.
Okay. Did you hear my question?
Ask me again.
Okay, I was referring back because Mark was indicating he and I wouldn't be a whole lot different. I've got slightly maybe a potential workaround, but he was asking as to whether there was more in-depth understanding of the information behind zoning as it relates to how land use is defined. Melissa had shared a comparison, but he was asking about overlays and state statutes and the like. So I don't know if Mark wants to re-ask those questions, or Jason, if how much more you might have delved into this, or would have time to delve into it. But that's the question I'm asking.
I guess I can. I don't have a solid answer on that right now. I can delve into that more though.
Okay. All right.
Hey, Mark, can I just ask you one question? Other than the Lake Superior overlay, what other overlay do you see being for opposite of no? Like, actually, I don't see any overlays for shoreland to be a yes. So I guess I'm confused what you mean when we're looking at this, because I'm willing to do the homework on this, but I'm really confused actually. You know, like. Where exactly do you see gravel pits are allowed in a shoreline overlay that I'm missing?
Well, no, again, this is the first time I've seen of this, and I haven't looked at it, but in St. Louis County, there are 3 overlay areas that they make reference to, or 2 at the bottom and 1 partially up. Then in Lakewood, there's an overlay, and then there's, I think in Duluth Township, an overlay.
Yeah, but hold on, we're only looking at shoreline overlays. We're only looking at the shoreland.
Well, the up in Midway shoreline overlay, it says no. I'm just wondering what those the overlays are.
Well, I know, but again, why would we take ourselves the time to do that when we're really just looking at the shoreland?
Let me interject something else here too.
Maybe because as an example, in the they've got setbacks as well in overlay districts on landfills. But if you recall, there were the townships have an opportunity for overlays, and if they're saying they're not allowing, if overlays enable, basically, if one of the potential approaches might be an overlay to limit any pits in shoreline areas, that would be a viable option. And so here it seems like, some of these overlays say no. And again, I haven't had a chance to look at this, but there's looks like to be 5 or 6 different overlay situations where there are no, and this thing is about extractive use. And so is that an option where overlays can accomplish not having pits in the shoreline areas?
Well, okay, so I guess I'm understanding you a little more, but the point of what I'm trying to say with a setback, one, the setback is defined by what a shoreland is defined by St. Louis County and the DNR. And instead of trying to redo a zoning with the county and do overlays with the county, we could simply state that in our ordinance, make the recommendation, but we could make the recommendation that in the ordinance, all we do is make a setback per the definition of a shoreland. And then we wouldn't have to worry about working with the county on overlay or anything else, because our setback would provide that already in the ordinance if the township board approves that. I feel it's a much faster and simpler way. I had talked to Wixo on this, and he agreed. This would it just simplifies things. Why go to like itemizing like zoning locations when we could just literally put footage, like exact footage from a body of water to a property. I think that's something we really want to look into. And again, these are my recommendations because and I put them out there because I think it's good for us to talk about, but also to understand where I'm coming from and the research I'm looking at. So if that makes a little more sense, why I think a setback it's more easier, because zoning can take a long time, and we don't need to take a long time when it's a very clear, our goal is just shoreland to protect. So.
Okay, well, I don't know that it is easier or not easier. Because my understanding is an example of a zoning overlay isn't a very difficult thing to process, and townships have done that already. And so I'm not ready to come to conclusions at this point in time. This is a research and analysis. And so, again, as you aren't, you had some questions on some of the items in my area. I have some questions here as well, but I wasn't yet ready to make conclusions. And so some of what is being said, there's a lot of information being put out, but where are the source materials on this? Where is the actual data showing the setbacks? Where is the data showing the particulates? I mean, again, it's up for discussion, but I need a little bit more information so that I'm comfortable in taking a position on some of this stuff. And I'm just asking questions. It sounds as if you're further ahead with your decision making than I am on as it relates to making recommendations.
Could I say something here?
Say, Patty.
The DNR is who says 1,000 feet back from a lake. So I think that's a pretty valid resource. If the DNR is suggesting it, I mean, if anything, I think maybe sometimes they're too easy, but I think that's a pretty reliable resource to go by. And that's what they're saying, and that's why we're saying 1,000 feet, because it's what the DNR has recommended.
Yeah, and again, that's I'm all for protecting, and that may be the appropriate distance. But again, having the information, the 500 feet from a house, what's the basis for that? Where's the comparison?
Right. Well, I think I like you, Mark, would prefer to more thoroughly understand it, ideally. I don't know, as we work towards the end, I'm not sure how well we're all going to understand everything. We kind of have a citizens group here versus a bunch of subject matter experts volunteering time, but we do want to try to address everything as thoroughly as we can. I'm not sure to what extent Jason's going to be able to bring additional information back, but that would be helpful. But I also don't envision we're going to have necessarily a line item detailed recommendation that has excruciating detail. We will likely be referencing other sources, as you said. Anything that's been enacted at one place or another that's known to the general public is referenceable. That's good. Pulling things out of thin air, probably not so much. But I think in concept, we may be recommending certain things and referring to other representative examples. I don't think we're trying to be experts on carcinogens or other aspects, even though we may share, information just to work as a group on some things that come to mind. But this one clearly, if we were to try to understand and make reference to how zoning is done, this nomenclature and the like, that's a tall order. But I do tend to think setbacks, we will, to your point, want to reference sources that have different setbacks that might be worth considering. And even Bonnie's comment, we may we may recommend being more stringent or less stringent on something. But the Len detail, that'll be interesting how that comes together. It's a challenging area for sure. Well, Jason, if you are able to bring a little additional, a better understanding to how these zoning things are set together. I don't know if Mark, if you've had a question around better understanding overlays, about any state statutes that need to be brought into it, and also about comparison of setbacks. Was there another question that you had asked?
No. Again, I didn't anticipate that. You're right. Trying to compare the different classifications between the townships would be a project in itself. So I wouldn't expect that.
Right.
But some basic information on comparative setbacks. The DNR is not, to me, I'm good with when they talk about 1,000 feet, and 300 feet rivers and lakes. I mean, that's not an issue for me, but I'm not sure for the different townships when I see some other terminology there that shows up in both county and township. I think it's important to be aware of the purpose of that type of language, but also having those, primarily the comparisons when we start putting out things that I haven't seen, such as, the setbacks from houses, and is there a consistent model, or is there other comparisons from townships that say it should be 300, 500, 750 feet, or whatever the case may be. The DNR obviously has been in place for a long period of time, a lot of scientific study. So, it's hard to question that. I just don't want to be in a position where people start asking the questions and it's like, well, we just thought that would be a good number. Well, how does it compare to other townships? Well, we didn't compare to other townships.
Right. Well, we're on the same page there. I agree with you. Not only have I been stressing things need to be objective based, not subjective, opinions and so forth. Anything we can reference that's in place, that's in use through another organization of a similar nature. Again, we keep talking about Gunnison because it seems to be a good source, is much more solid ground than just picking something that isn't currently in use. Again, I wrote down, Bonnie probably wrote down, we're gonna check on a comparison of setbacks. I think that's an important thing to talk a bit about. And to the extent that Jason can look a bit further at how overlays are related, or whether there's any state statutes that deal with anything associated with this land use. I don't claim to have the background in that area, so it might sound a little bit generic, but if you can bring some additional clarity, that's welcomed.
And sometimes I have a tendency to be the devil's advocate, but again, the more that we're prepared to respond to questions, the better the process will proceed versus having to backtrack.
No, I think, no, I appreciate it. Believe you me, inquiring minds want to know. So the better we can understand it, it's going to help us. I do tend to close this one out. I do tend to think that the information relative to how the zoning is viewed so differently as far as how they classify and then how they reference the allowability or not of cups is right now it's just information. I don't know how we necessarily use it. But using that as a springboard and then reinforcing what I asked earlier, people look at the Gunnison ordinance and identify, I'll say, since we're moving at a pretty big clip here, I would ask that you look at it and get back to us. Tomorrow's already Wednesday. Let me see, no, today's Monday, tomorrow's Tuesday. Get back to us Wednesday. I'll say 5 o'clock. People may or may not act on this, but we do need a little time to tally those items. If there are a number of them, we'll use that as input into the Thursday call. And of course, that will parallel the first bullet on number 3, talking about Thursday's agenda is the ordinance comparison. So there'll be some information sent out about that, which is basically taking the ordinance as a comparison. Gunnison is being used right now because of the same reason we talked prior, compared to St. Louis County. Then looking at within that comparison, some major differences and what they might mean in terms of addressing our objective, which is to whether or not there's value in the township taking on additional responsibility to better protect the citizens. So that's going to be on Thursday's agenda. We'll add in people's comments about things they believe are overreach or they don't agree with in the Ganesen literature. And then we'll also deal with enforcement, information on the enforcement of ordinances. So that's going to round out what we try to work on Thursday. Is there open forum back to group? We're closing in on 8 o'clock here. Is there anything else that people want to volunteer or see brought up on Thursday, or any other comments relative to what we covered tonight? And I see we have a number of people there. I'll just open up the floor. Okay, got Matt, Deb, Todd, Chris, Ed, Lynn, Clay, Paul.
Can I speak for a moment? On this
Hey, Dan.
500, on this 500-foot setback Melissa's talking about from neighbor, now is that the neighbor's property line or is that the neighbor's house? The actual physical house? Or is that the neighbor's property line at that 500-foot mark?
So my, given this was just, I'm throwing out ideas because we have to start talking about them. But there are townships. So a lot of townships have 300 feet. It's from extractive use site, like the site to the house is 300 feet. I think that's what the county is 300 feet, and then 100 foot from the property line. So it would be to the house, not
directly to the house. Yeah, I was looking at it as 500 feet from the property line, and I was going,
no.
wow, if you had neighbors all the way around you, you'd be able to harvest 2.5 acres of gravel right in the middle of the 40, and that would be about it.
Yeah, no, and I need to look exactly, but I've looked at quite a few townships, and I've seen at least 2 that I could think of offhand that have a 500-foot setback to the residents. I believe most of them are 300 feet. But the reason I'm throwing that out there is because the more I'm learning about silica dust, it's like that would be something to consider as an extra. And I think it's good we have time to discuss it. But no, to the residents, Dan, I want to try to make this reasonable for everybody. So a compromise, as we say.
Water setback. Now, what do you consider lakeshore?
Sorry, Dan, I can't hear you.
On a lakeshore setback, what do you consider lakeshore versus swamp shore?
It would go on
logs
the standard.
and other things like that. I mean, lowlands that only fill up with water once a year in the spring and then dry up again. What do you?
So my theory, and again, I'm still working on. So I've been talking to the DNR and everything else, and I got a map of what they deem to be official lakes and rivers. I think I put it on the site, but I'm not sure. But according to what the DNR standards of a lake and river are, that would make sense to me. That'd be fair. Okay, honey, I'm sorry. So if the DNR considers something to be a lake or a river, then that's what we would consider to be a lake or river. I think that makes sense. I think that's what the guidelines are speaking of. So, and I did get a map. I'll email it to the group with a lady from the DNR was nice enough to actually put a Freedomburg one together for us, so we can actually see what maps what lakes and rivers we have in our township. And then I kind of cataloged where the 14 pits are in that. So I can send that out to the group. But what I would assume, don't assume, but from my research and what I would like to see is from what the DNR designates as a lake or river. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
I'll wait on that for a minute. Maybe somebody else will pipe up. Go ahead.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. I had my mute on. What I was saying is a final comment is, Bonnie, you may want to get the minutes drafted to me, maybe if possible within 24 hours. We're working at a pace now where I think some of the things are coming up as asked by different parties or committed to that we want to probably capture, so people can track that and follow up on those that fit their responsibility, or be aware we're looking to run some of these things to ground. So if you could do that, I'd appreciate it. With that, last call. If there's anybody else that has any comments or questions like to share. You got a few visuals. I don't see anybody raising their hand. The rest of the people are on mute. Okay, motion that we adjourn the call for this evening.
Second.
Get a second. Second, thank you, Patty. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks again.
Opposed? Okay, good night, everybody.
Night.
All right.